So this is a single staked creel, so it was designed for a person to carry, like so. So it's a good bit lighter, and it's an important creel because it's probably one that was used right throughout the country at one point. There's a folder of drawings by a guy called Hugh Douglas Hamilton, I think, and it's called The Town Cries of Dublin. It was published in 2003, but it was drawings he had made which were forgotten about, but it shows amongst the cries of Dublin a person bringing stuff around in a creel like this. And similarly, so that was before 1800, the 1770s, I think. And there's also photographs of people having vegetables and things like this for sale in a basket like this in Cork in the early 1900s. I've seen pictures of it from Galway as well, so I think this was once a very popular basket. But one of the things it has, which we haven't done already, is a turned in mouth whale. Tá buine béal sa canseo, tá na bunani castius jacarísh on a snachwilladern effecall eretivumwe. They're hidden from the outside. And that probably mattered when you're carrying it because it meant there was nothing to get caught up on you. Okay, so I'm just going to begin this basket now. So you can see I've actually shown the square on the template so you can pick it out. So the 4 thickest rods will go in the 4 corners, like so. So if you're laying out a template for a basket like this, you will get a sample rod like this, and that will give you a rough idea where to put the holes for the next one, and so forth. So these are 1 out from there, 1 thickness of rod out, and then again 1 more thickness of rod out to get to the next ones. So this creel will not be straight, it'll be more oval. You can see there's quite a distinct belly on this, so I'm just trying to straighten it just a little bit. So we match this on the other side. Again, 1 thickness of rod, and the same, but that's not clean, so I'll just cut it first. So one of these rods looks a little bit thicker than the one that's there, so I'll change them around. And then tie up as before. Initially, you can tie all of them in 1 tie, and then you can release the corners in due course. Okay, so I have my first set of 18 weavers here. So again, I'm starting at the left-hand corner post, and I'm making sure this time to leave enough of this rod sticking out so that it will be able to turn back into the work. So it's just a mouth whale as before, which means you'll be in 4 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4. So your second rod goes in underneath here. And again, it must be long enough to turn back in. So that's about correct. Always better to give yourself a little bit to spare. So that's long enough to turn back in. back in. Úimeacha corneal, keep out the corners. It's even probably more important with a basket like this, where the weavers are close enough in strength to the uprights. I have a little bit of sheep wool there. So for now, this is stuff that we have covered already, as in it's the same as the mouth wales we've already done. And we'll pick it up again when we come to turning back in the rods. Okay, so we're coming towards the finish of the mouth wale. Again, brace the thing so you can get a kink in the corner first. Okay, it's a rounded corner so it's not as distinct. And thread your second last under two here. And because this is so long, you want to make sure you don't get ensnared in it. You're going in over here, so that stays out of the way. And your final rod. And then that gets drawn across like that. I often use my knee. This rod is a little bit branchy, which isn't ideal for pulling in. In general, with creel work, we don't worry so much about branchy rods. It's the kind of basket where you can use them. So this is being threaded through. So I would describe the threading through as it goes in over everything that's in that space and out under everything that's in the next space. But of course, this has nothing to do with it, so make sure that that doesn't get hooked in. So that's the mouth wale put on. So when you're doing the mouth wale here, you'll have to press down on these as you go. But first I'm going to give it just a little tap. I'll have to do this 3 or 4 times quite early on in this basket. But so now, when we're doing the rand here, you press down on this rod like so, so that you can rand this without a kink, a nice smooth. So each time you consciously take that, press it down, the butt. So again, press that down. So we can complete this row of randing now, going to the left around the creel like that. You can see that some of these rods have quite a pointed cut, which means they were cut by hand with the hook. And after this row, we will be able to release the 4 corners from the tie. It'll help to keep the shape of the creel. So now that is that first row of randing complete. So I give it another tapping. And now I'm going to turn in the butts. So, like so. Like so. And it's probably a good idea to trim as you go. If you ever found when doing this that these were bouncing up a lot, of course you could follow with the randing rod immediately to keep them down. But for most people that might be a touch confusing. So it's probably better to do two separate operations, turning in the butts first and then separately doing the next stroke of randing. Agus mar dúis me tá muidir casú isteach bunaní na slatí mar seo, agus an sin ba me an é seo a leanúint le ná fiocháin. So, tá mar gul ar garú seo agus go mai sé go deas níta mar ní bhí me an deis céine a ríseo hrú sin go mór a chuid sa cornéal. Mar ba é slat cornéal sin ba se go búach mar a deanú freistal in se. Chaoin Canjernach, the last one, and that's been now trimmed. Now, there isn't much point wrapping it at this moment. You're better now to try to consolidate this with a row of randing. So, tamagol anish artí malova chlé a drosho. Like no fiocani, you know. I am now going left-handedly around the basket, randing these rods. So that base our butt has popped out there, so I just consolidate it in position and then weave it. So tá mar gola scuilú na slat cornéal inis mar tá sé táhachtach ba sé gola steach mar an dhéanamh me seo. I am releasing the four corner posts now because otherwise the creel will slope inwards too much. So this is my next corner post and this one. So now I'm also going to give it another hitting with the wrapping iron because that's quite important to keep all the gaps closed, especially because these butts tend to have an upward force about them. And one could perhaps retie if you felt that your basket wasn't sloping in enough, because this is slightly sloping in. Because this is a single shaped creel, it's even more important to go around and just make sure that none of these have moved, and you could hear that one because the movement of the weave itself tends to pull your uprights out of position. That's not necessary if you're making it in the ground, but it's one of the things about a template that you need to remember. So it's just a question of randing these rods to a finish, and when we know that our rods have only enough length to do one more row, we will finish by going to the right so that the rods end up in a tucked position, as we showed with the other creel. So because some of these rods are now too short to do two more movements, so there's only one more movement really left in that rod and this rod. So I'm going to go to the right and therefore leave them in a trapped position. So when you build up to having two, you take the lower one, climb over the other one, and then that's left in a trapped position. So we would tend to finish all creel making rods in that way, even when randing a creel as opposed to making a knotted creel. So the final two rods, the second last goes under one. So the last rod will go under two, thereby ensuring that all rods are under the same amount of material. So in basket making in Ireland, I call this particular basket a Tyrone creel. But as I said before, it really was from all over. But in that particular example, the next set of rods was introduced as if you were left-handed, as in going in this direction. So your first stroke would be like this, and your next one like this. Now for some people that can be quite difficult to change direction like that. So there is my scissors again, and you will go in under it. So if it doesn't suit you to go in this direction, don't be in the least troubled about it. Just go clockwise as normal. The justification for reversing directions is because you have single stakes, it's presumed that if you're always going clockwise, it might be inclined to drive your stakes a little bit to the right. I don't think it's a big issue because I've made them both ways and I haven't really noticed a huge difference, but that is the reason why they're adopting this approach of going clockwise, anti-clockwise, clockwise, anti-clockwise in the introducing of the rods. But I wouldn't get fixated on it. I'd just do whatever was comfortable for yourself. So once I've begun going in this direction, I'll continue. So as well as going clockwise, anti-clockwise, the basket that I describe as a Tyrone creel in basket making in Ireland also had a handle which began here. That meant that you would slipe your rod and drive it in here to form the handle bow. Give it a little nick with your knife to bend it out. And you would do the same on the other side, and these would be the rods that would form your handle. To say that they're in your way when you're weaving is a bit of an understatement. So, although I was keen to follow tradition, I also think you have to be flexible about these things, and this handle is put at a higher point. I've driven it in afterwards, and I think it's perfectly adequate. So this particular creel here has had 5 rows of weavers put in. This one was put in the normal fashion, turned in mouth whale going clockwise, anti-clockwise, clockwise, anti-clockwise, clockwise. But as I said, there'd be no problem in making it clockwise either if you chose. Then there's a top knot put on, and then to finish, in basket making in Ireland, that particular one I was describing, they used 6 base sticks as opposed to 4. That means that they involved the corner posts to create 6. I wasn't really that convinced by that or for the need for it. So although I used to do that, I've reverted to just having 4. And these are turned in and driven into the work as opposed to pulled through the mouth whale like in the other creels. One thing when a basket like this or a base is oval is that you have to straighten your line. Your first corner post goes over here. So you first of all have to begin with the weaver, over, under, over and turn back, or if it's exhausted, put in another one. And you keep weaving until you meet your first corner post. Your corner posts then and all your other posts can go over 2, under 2, but all your other rods will go over 1, under 1, over 1, under 1, like that. And of course, once you've done one side, you have to repeat that on the other side and leave the middle filling until last. So otherwise it's like the other creels. So this creel is based on a basket that we used to call a pardog, though occasionally it would have also been called a load depending on the area. The idea of those baskets was that they would have a hinged bottom which would fall out like this. So this would have been made in this fashion, it would have been bordered here, and then the base was made as a separate entity. So I've changed the design somewhat to give it a fixed base, and in this base you can see that I've 4 like every other creel, and again it's a question of just straightening your line, so fill until the line is straight, and similarly if it has warped a little bit on this side, fill this until the line is straight. And I've still done over 2 with the main corner posts, but I've put all the other rods over 1, under 1, over 1, under 1. And if you're making a template for a basket like this, it's really important to remember to keep your back and front stakes opposite each other so that you can successfully complete the base. So essentially the straight line is just like a creel, and then you could take a flexible string or something and describe an arc like that, and then make sure that you drill these to be opposite as in a rectangular creel, and then you can fill the rest of the space. So we call that a D-shaped creel. This is a pair of panniers from the Dúnchaoin area of Kerry. They were also used on the Blasket Islands, but there the Blasket ones tended to have an opening, like on Tosh or the window in the other creels. So these ones are slipped bottom, as in the base opens. So in other regions we would tend to call that a pardog, but here in Kerry they call them Úimeacha. So I'm just going to lift up the base so you can see them. So this releases, and the base, which is essentially an oval hoop woven, hinged onto the basket like this, and the load can fall out. And there's a simple track style border put on to secure it. One of the things about this pair of Úimeacha is that they didn't have a proper buine bail or mouth whale. They had a simpler form, which is the knot that we use to introduce the rods in the creel. And because I had seen a picture where I thought there were 2 of these, I also put a top knot on top, just because I felt it would be more secure, because it does seem to me to be a slightly weak point in the design of the baskets. But then it's tried and tested in that region. So Shaped Creel Úimeacha as Cantar Dúnchaoin I chun Kiri, agus rinneamh an bailach seo iad, thosaíodir an seo, agus an inad buine béal, tíir do rinneadar díreach an ná fiocháin in Nyanha le tosnú hartar cleaver be. Cuir se slimbád homai mar chéime go meach sin níos fáiscí a bailach sin. Bhí an táis ar chuid acu, go mór a chuid as Ilan Blascód. Agus feici tú gúla tón, tá tún an scuilú mar seo, agus tití a túla amach mar sin. Agus tá caisín simply ar a mór. So we are going to make the creels that we make with wooden templates, but these were how you would traditionally begin. You would first of all make a rectangle in the ground, and usually the proportions are 4:3. So for this creel, the big creel, this will be 24 inches by 18. So now I'm going to make a willow staple from this. So I give it a little twist like this, and then point the 2 ends. Secure it into the ground down here. So press it in, and then I can take out my corner post. And I will repeat that process in the 4th and final corner. And drive it into the ground, like so, and then hammer it in.
And don't worry if it's a little bit cracked, so long as it holds together, that's all that matters. So our next thing will be to put corner posts in, one strong rod and two lesser rods. And to the extent that the rods have a belly, you would usually allow it to flow inwards. Perhaps not for the corner post if it was very distinct, a very curved one. And I'll allow that to flow inwards too because it's almost straight. So this is the other corner part here. And here is its partner. That's not so straight, so I'll try again. There's a little stone there just slightly in the way. So that's your corner post. You do the same setup here, same setup there, and same setup there. And of course, if you own a bodkin, one of the things you could consider, if the ground is very tough, would be to make a hole first with that. So since this ground is fairly tough, I'm going to use my bodkin here to show you that that's another possible way to do it. And it's possibly, if anything, more accurate. Because if there are small stones, the bodkin will tend to shove them out of the way. So I'm going to find the middle point here. It doesn't matter which unit of measurement you use, if it's inches or if it's centimetres. I'm going to go with centimetres here because I have a nice even number. So 20 is the middle point. So I go a little bit to the left of 20 for one stake. And again there. And if the belly is very pronounced, you can take a little bit of it out. But allow it to slope inwards rather than outwards. This doesn't matter as much with a wooden template because they rotate, you haven't that control. So with the space that remains, you can see it's about 19. So I'd err on having the group a little bit closer to the corner, so rather than going exactly halfway, I would prefer a slightly closer spacing to the corner and a slightly wider spacing towards the middle. And that will apply again on the long side. So if we go in here a little bit closer to the corner, and traditionally they would have used the hand for these measurements. So let's say they might have thought a space for the knuckles here and a space further down and the hand for this space. So again, you would do something like that and back for the knuckles like that. So the main point being that the spaces are not completely equidistant. They're a little bit gathered. The spaces between closest to the corner are a little bit closer to the corner, and these spaces a little wider. So essentially you repeat that process throughout. On the long side, you're going to have 4 pairs of rods, 4 sets of uprights. So it can be still useful to get the middle point, but generally speaking, it's more a question of using the eye and deciding that space would be about right for that, and a slightly wider spacing for these two. So I would put 2 in here, for instance.
Sin Gaeilge atá ar na slataí seo ná na Chaoin.
do the same on this side and then divide the remaining space at a slightly wider spacing for the last two sets. Yeah, that's okay actually. I can only put it in. There's a stone just there